She didn't go to the clinic to be brave. She went because she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't look at herself in the mirror without her hands shaking. Nia Whitaker paid cash at a walk-in maternity clinic on the Lower East Side, gave a fake last name at the front desk, and sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes staring at a water stain on the ceiling while her entire life rearranged itself around one thought she couldn't outrun. What if it's real? Real. It was real. 9 weeks. Healthy heartbeat. A life growing inside her that she had not planned, had not asked for, and could not undo. She cried in the bathroom stall for 3 minutes. Then she washed her face, put her cardigan back on, and walked out of the clinic into the sharp October air like a woman who had somewhere normal to be. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that the man waiting in the black SUV parked half a block from the clinic entrance was not a stranger. Kwon Min-jae had been following her since she left the Mujin Global building at noon. And before Nia even reached the corner to flag a cab, Min-jae already had his phone against his ear. His voice was flat. Careful. The voice of a man who understood the weight of what he was about to say. She went to a maternity clinic, sir. Cash. Fake name. She was inside for 42 minutes. A pause. Then Tae-gun's voice came through the line, and even Min-jae, a man who had survived 2 assassination attempts and watched men beg for their lives, felt the temperature drop. Don't let her know you followed her, Tae-gun said. Bring me everything. The call ended. And in the back of that SUV, the most feared Korean crime boss operating between Seoul and New York sat with his phone pressed against his thigh and stared out the tinted window at a city that suddenly felt like it was tilting beneath him. He already knew. Somewhere beneath the custom suit and the locked jaw and the years of training himself to feel nothing he didn't choose to feel, he already knew what Min-jae had just confirmed. Nia was pregnant, and she was planning to disappear. If you have ever carried a secret so large it changes how you breathe, if you have ever sat across from someone who trusts you and smiled while something enormous lived behind your ribs, then you already understand what Nia Whitaker felt on the morning she walked back into Mujin Global Holdings and pressed the button for the executive floor. She had her coffee. She had her planner. She had the quarterly logistics briefing printed and tabbed and ready for Tae-gun's 9 o'clock. She had a plan. It wasn't a good plan. She knew that. She was 28 years old, 9 weeks pregnant, had roughly $11,000 in a savings account, and her only concrete idea was to get herself to a city where nobody had ever heard of Tae-gun, rent a cheap apartment, and figure out the rest before her body made the decision for her. She told herself it was practical. She told herself the baby would be better off without the weight of what Tae-gun was, without the enemies that came with his name, without growing up inside an empire that ran on fear and controlled loyalty and violence, dressed up in Italian suits. She told herself that, and she mostly believed it, right up until the elevator doors opened and she stepped out onto the executive floor and found it completely, unnaturally silent. Not quiet. Silent. The junior analysts weren't at their desks. Tae-gun's personal staff had scattered. The usual low-level hum of a Manhattan corporate floor, keyboards, printer wheels, the distant rumble of the city, was gone. Nia stopped. On her desk, in the spot where she always set her coffee, sat a white ceramic mug she had never seen before. Steam curled from the surface. The smell hit her a second later, ginger. Her stomach turned, not from nausea, though that was always there now, threading through her mornings like a low alarm. It turned from something else, something closer to dread. She set her bag down slowly. She did not touch the mug. She stood at her desk with both hands flat on the surface and looked at Tae-gun's closed office door and understood, with the particular certainty of a woman who has spent 4 years learning how this man moves, that the silence was intentional. He had cleared the floor. Whatever happened next, he did not want witnesses. The intercom on her desk clicked. Nia. His voice was even. No inflection. The kind of calm that people who didn't know him might mistake for indifference. Nia knew better. She had spent 4 years translating Tae-gun's silences. That particular brand of quiet, measured, controlled, with something underneath it pulled so tight it could snap, was the most dangerous version of him she knew. She straightened her cardigan, picked up her planner out of habit, walked to his door. She knocked anyway, because she still believed in the fiction of normal, and opened it. I was standing at the window. That was the first thing. Tae-gun almost never stood at the window. He sat, he moved with deliberate efficiency, he occupied space the way powerful men did, purposefully, economically. Standing at the window with his back to the door was a posture she had seen from him exactly twice in 4 years, and both times something significant had gone wrong inside his organization. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Sit down." She didn't sit. She stood just inside the door and held her planner against her chest like it was something to hold on to. "I have the quarterly report ready," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The Busan freight numbers are slightly down from projections, but where did you go yesterday afternoon?" The question landed flat and precise, and for a half second Nia's entire body went still the way a bird goes still when it sees a shadow cross overhead. "I had a personal appointment," she said. "What kind?" "Medical. Routine checkup." He turned. She had braced for the version of him she feared most. The cold, boardroom Tae-gun who looked at people like problems to be solved, whose dark eyes never gave anything away. The one who made grown men in expensive suits lose the ability to hold his gaze. That man wasn't standing in front of her. What was standing in front of her was harder to face. Tae-gun was looking at her like she had already hurt him. Like whatever wall he normally built between himself and everything that could reach him had developed a crack, and he was aware of it, and furious about the awareness. And something else underneath all of that, something she didn't have a word for, was leaking through the gap. "Nia," he said quietly, "ginger helps with morning sickness." The planner slipped from her hand. She didn't register it hitting the floor. She was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and the room between them was doing something strange, contracting, maybe, or expanding, she couldn't tell. And every careful story she had assembled over the past 9 weeks started pulling apart at the seams. "I don't know what," she started. "I know where you went," he said. "I know what clinic. I know how long you were inside. I know you paid cash and used a different name." A pause. "I know you've been looking at apartments in cities that are not New York." The blood left her face. She could feel it going, like a tide pulling back, leaving her standing on cold sand. "You had me followed." Her voice came out strange, thin, not angry yet. Not quite, because the anger hadn't caught up to the terror. "Minji was already assigned to you." His voice didn't flinch. "He has been since the gala." "That was 9 weeks ago." "Yes." Nia looked at him. The man who signed her paychecks, who had handed her a company credit card and trusted her with schedules and contacts and information that could rearrange the balance of power between 3 continents. The man she had spent 4 years learning to read like a language she'd taught herself alone, in the dark, late at night, when she had nothing else to think about. The man whose child was living inside her body right now, and who had apparently known she was carrying it before she finished walking out of the clinic. Something inside her, something that had been bending since October, finally snapped. "You have no right," she said. "Whatever you think this, sit down, Nia. Don't tell me to sit down." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it, hated the crack, hated that he could hear how close to the edge she was when she was trying so hard to look like a woman who had this under control. "You don't get to surveil me and then act like I owe you an explanation. You're 9 weeks pregnant with my child and you were planning to leave New York without telling me." His voice had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't soft at all. "So yes, Nia, you owe me an explanation." The room held both of them in it. She looked at the floor where her planner had fallen. The pages had fanned out. The neatly tabbed quarterly report, the color-coded logistics breakdowns, the handwritten note in the margin of Tuesday's page that said, "Dr. Aptietz. Cash?" And then 3 question marks she had written at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. She bent down and picked it up. And then she sat. She didn't cry immediately. She wanted to. Her throat had been doing that particular tightening thing since she walked through the door, the physical signal that something was about to come loose. But she pressed it down and set the planner on the edge of his desk and folded her hands in her lap like she was in a performance review. Tae-gun sat across from her, not in his usual position, leaning back, commanding the space. He sat forward, elbows on the desk, and just looked at her with that expression she still couldn't name. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since yesterday afternoon, before I got back." Yes, she absorbed that. Yesterday, she had sat through 2 phone calls with the Busan freight coordinator and a 40-minute budget meeting and eaten half a sandwich at her desk and looked at Tae-gun's closed door 17 times, feeling the secret press against her ribs like something trying to get out. And he had already known. He had known, and he had come back to his office, and he had let her sit out there and go through the entire afternoon without a word. "Why didn't you say something last night?" she asked. "I needed to think." And this morning, she gestured at nothing, at the silent floor beyond his office. "The ginger tea." Something moved across his face, gone before she could name it. "I didn't know how to start the conversation," he said, which was possibly the most human thing she had ever heard him Tae-gun admit to, and the honesty of it hit her harder than she wanted it to. She looked at her hands. "I'm not going to pretend," she said. "You already know the answer to most of this. You know where I was. You know what it means. You know I was looking at other cities." She stopped, exhaled. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me why." She looked up. "Why?" The word came out flat, almost bitter. "You're asking me why I was planning to leave." "Yes." Tae-gun. She said his name without the professional distance, without the buffer of his title or the careful formality she'd spent 4 years maintaining, and felt something shift in the room the moment she did. "Look around you. Look at what you are. Look at who you have sitting in your conference rooms and calling your private lines and showing up at your events with daughters they've been grooming for exactly this kind of alliance." She paused. "And then look at me." "I'm looking at you," he said. "I'm your secretary." Her voice stayed level, barely. "I'm a 28-year-old black woman from Baltimore who wears cardigans and brings you coffee and takes notes at meetings where men like Baek Do-hwan pretend I'm not in the room. I'm not one of them. I was never supposed to be one of them." She stopped, swallowed. "And I was terrified of what it would mean if your world found out that someone like me was carrying your air." Silence. "Someone like you," he repeated. "Don't." "I'm asking what you mean." "You know what I mean." She pressed her palm flat against the desk to keep her hands from shaking. "I've watched the women in your orbit my entire career. The heiresses, the socialite connections, the alliance daughters with their appropriate bloodlines and their perfect—" She stopped herself. The word had almost been bodies, and she was not going to say that in front of him. "It's not self-pity, it's arithmetic. I know what kind of woman fits the role you're supposed to fill, and I know I'm not her. And bringing a baby into the middle of your world, with your enemies, with the people who already look at me like I'm decorating your lobby. I wasn't going to do that to a child who hasn't even been born yet." Tae-gun was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Manhattan continued its indifferent noise, sirens, horns, the low hiss of the city that ran 24 hours without asking anyone's permission. "You plan to disappear," he said finally. Not a question. "I plan to go somewhere that didn't know your name and raise our child somewhere safe." Without telling me I had a child. She couldn't answer that. He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to confirm. "Naya." He said her name differently this time. Not the executive summoning her to a meeting. Not the man who had spent 9 weeks presumably cataloging every signal he'd missed and every moment he'd failed to see what was right in front of him. Something older, more exposed. "I have watched you for 4 years. She stilled. "Not the way you're thinking," he said. "Not cataloging. I didn't have you followed before the gala. There were no reports." He leaned forward slightly. "I just watched. The way you handled the Osaka negotiation when 3 of my senior men were losing the thread. The way you talked down the building facilities manager last winter when he was ready to walk off the job and nobody else noticed he was about to. The way you eat lunch alone at your desk and think I don't see you reading at your window." A pause. "The way you wear those cardigans like you're trying to take up less space in a room that you're actually the most capable person in." She didn't move. "The night of the gala," he said. I didn't plan that. I want you to know that. It wasn't calculated." "I know," she said quietly. "When I woke up and you were gone, I thought—" He stopped, pressed his jaw tight. Tae-gun, she knew, almost never stopped himself mid-sentence. The fact that he did told her more than the sentence would have. "I thought you had decided it was a mistake." "I was terrified," she said honestly. "Not of you, of what comes after." of what it means when the thing you've wanted without admitting you wanted it actually happens, and then you have to deal with all the ways it can go wrong. He looked at her. "I'm not going to let you disappear," he said. The directness of it, the absolute uncomplicated clarity, should have felt threatening. The old Naya, the one who had spent 4 years making herself smaller, probably would have called it controlling. But his hands were resting flat on the desk, and his voice, for the first time since she'd entered this office, had lost the management layer underneath it. The professional distance. The armor. He wasn't issuing an order. He was telling her the truth. "You don't get to make that call alone," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." A beat. "Then what do you want?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I want you to stay. I want to be part of this. I want—" He stopped again. She watched him locate the word somewhere. "I want you to let me try to be something worth staying for." Nia sat with that. Outside, the city kept moving. A delivery truck horn. The distant bark of a siren tapering away. Ordinary life pressing itself against the glass. Her hands had stopped shaking somewhere in the last few minutes. She hadn't noticed when. "I'm scared," she said finally, not apologizing for it, just stating it like a fact the way she stated facts when they mattered. "Not of you, of your world, of what it does to people inside it. I've seen the captain's wives. I've sat in rooms where women become decorative. I'm not going to become decorative, Tae-gun. Not for anyone." "I know," he said. "I need you to understand that's not negotiable." "I understand." She studied his face, the jaw still tight, the eyes that almost never gave anything away and were, right now, giving her more than she knew how to process. "I'm also keeping this baby," she said. "That was never in question. That part doesn't change regardless of what you decide." "I know that too." She exhaled. The thing that had been pressing against her ribs for 9 weeks, the weight of the secret, the arithmetic of the fear, the long nights calculating exits, didn't vanish. It didn't suddenly become manageable. But something in the room had shifted, and Nia, who had spent 4 years learning to read this man's silences, recognized what the shift was. He had stopped pretending the wall between them was structural, that it existed because it had to, that the distance was professional or appropriate, or simply the nature of things. He had taken it down, and the man left standing without, it was someone she didn't have a category for. She picked up her planner from the desk. "I'm going to need time," she said. "Take it. And I'm going to need you to understand that whatever happens, the baby comes first. Before your organization, before your alliances, before every single one of those men who have opinions about who should be sitting in this office." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. She stood. He stood. They looked at each other across the desk. The man who commanded one of the most feared criminal organizations stretching across the Pacific, and the woman who had spent 4 years managing his legitimate empire from a desk outside his door, now standing on the other side of a line neither of them had planned to cross. "The quarterly report," Nia said. He blinked. "It's on the desk. The Busan numbers need your sign-off before 3. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something earlier than a smile. The thing that precedes one, that arrives before the expression has time to settle into itself. "Nia." "The report, Tae-gun." She moved toward the door, then stopped without turning around. "And for the record, I went to the clinic because I needed to know for certain, not because I'd already decided what to do. I hadn't." A breath. "I still haven't fully decided." She reached the door. "But I'm still here," she said. "That probably means something." She walked out. The office door closed behind her with a soft, deliberate click. And inside the room, Tae-gun stood at his desk with his hands flat on the surface and looked at the door for a long moment. Then he sat down, pulled the quarterly report toward him, and uncapped his pen. The Busan numbers needed sign-off before 3. 3 days passed before Tae-gun said anything else about it. Not because he had forgotten. Nia knew that. She had spent 4 years learning the particular rhythm of how this man processed things he couldn't control. The extended silences, the way his posture shifted almost imperceptibly when something was working through him beneath the surface, the slight delay before he answered questions that had nothing to do with business, but everything to do with the fact that his mind was elsewhere, turning something over. She recognized all of it. She just hadn't expected to be the thing he was turning over. Those 3 days were the strangest of her professional life. He didn't treat her differently. That was the unsettling part. He still summoned her at 9 o'clock sharp, still handed her annotated documents with his corrections in red ink that she had long since accepted as his version of thoroughness, still asked for the Busan freight updates and the New York port reports, and the weekly reconciliation of Mujin Global's legitimate holdings, like the conversation in his office had been an ordinary meeting and not the moment where the entire architecture of her carefully constructed plan had collapsed. But the ginger tea appeared on her desk every morning. That was new. She didn't acknowledge it. He didn't mention it. It was just there, steaming, in the same white ceramic mug, positioned exactly where her coffee usually sat, as if someone had received very specific instructions about placement and timing. On the fourth morning, she arrived to find both mugs waiting, the ginger tea and her usual dark roast, side by side. She stood at her desk for a moment looking at them. Then she picked up the coffee, moved the tea 2 inches to the left so it wasn't in her way, and sat down to start the day. When she looked up, Min Jae was standing near the elevator bank, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The security chief was a compact, watchful man in his mid-30s who spoke rarely and observed constantly. In 4 years, she had exchanged perhaps 40 sentences with him, most of them logistical. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away. It was not nothing. She filed it and moved on. The call from Tae-gun came at 11:15 on a Thursday. Not the intercom, his personal line, the number she had saved in her phone under his name because she had spent years telling herself that was purely professional and had never looked too closely at the fact that she knew the number without checking. "Can you come in?" Not a question, she knew that. But it landed softer than a command, which meant something, though she wasn't sure what yet. She carried her planner, old habit, armor. He was behind his desk this time, which was more familiar ground. The window-standing version of him unsettled her in ways she hadn't fully cataloged. This version, contained, controlled, the expensive suit doing exactly what expensive suits were designed to do. She knew how to operate around. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "I've been honest with you," she said. "I know you have." He looked at her directly. "Do you want to stay in New York?" She blinked. Of all the questions she had prepared for, that wasn't on the list. "That's what you needed to ask me." "It matters. Answer it." Nia considered. She thought about the apartment she had been looking at in Portland. A 2-bedroom on a quiet street, reasonable rent, far enough from any Korean-American underworld infrastructure that she had checked 3 times and found nothing connected to his name. She had walked through the listing photos so many times the layout had become a kind of mental furniture. She thought about that, and then she looked at the Manhattan skyline outside Tae-gun's windows and understood something she hadn't admitted to herself yet. "I want to leave," she said carefully. "That's different from wanting to." He was quiet. "New York is what I know," she continued. "Mujin Global is what I know. The work is good. It's real. I built something here, even if my name isn't on any of it." She paused. "And the idea of starting over somewhere alone with a baby, and no network, and no—" She stopped. "I'm not afraid of hard things, but I'm not going to pretend the Portland apartment wasn't also a kind of running away." "Then stay," he said. "It's not that simple." "I know." He leaned forward. "I want to marry you." The room did that thing again. The contraction, the compression, all the available air suddenly feeling insufficient. Tae-gun. Not because of the baby. His voice was flat and direct, and she had learned to believe him when he sounded like this, because the performing version of him, Tae-gun, had tells she had catalogued over 4 years, and this wasn't any of them. "The baby is part of it, but that's not the reason." "You've had 4 years to say something," she said. "I had 4 years to not destroy something I wasn't ready to ruin by saying the wrong thing." A pause. "I ruin things, Nia. I'm aware of that. The people closest to me tend to pay for it." Something moved behind his eyes. Gone before she could name it. "I was protecting you from myself." "That's—" She searched for the word. "That's not nothing, but it's also not my decision to make." "No, it's mine, and I made it badly." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you now." She looked at him. "Im Tae-gun, with the tattooed hands he kept covered in boardrooms and the dark eyes that had looked at her across 4 years of professional distance and apparently never said the thing they were saying now. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them." "I'm not a trophy wife. I'm not a protected asset. I'm not someone you manage." Her voice stayed level. "If I marry you, I work. I stay involved in the legitimate operations. I have a real role, not a courtesy title. Yes. And the moment you treat me like a prisoner, the moment protection becomes control, we revisit this entire conversation." "Understood." "I mean it, Tae-gun. I need you to actually understand it, not just agree in this office because it's what gets you what you want." He was quiet for a moment. "You'll tell me," he said finally. "When it starts feeling like control instead of protection, you'll say it directly, not hint at it, not work around it. You'll say it. And you'll listen." "I'll listen," he said. "I can't promise I'll always like it." She almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her. The fact that it was there at all, that this conversation about her life and his criminal empire and a pregnancy she hadn't planned could contain something that nearly became laughter. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay, yes. Or okay, you're still thinking." "Okay, yes," she said. The wedding was small. That was her word for it, and she held to it despite the pressure that appeared, quietly but unmistakably, from multiple directions once the decision became known inside the Mujin Circle's senior structure. There were suggestions, relayed through Min-jae mostly, who delivered them with the expression of a man performing a function he had not signed up for. A larger ceremony would project stability. A traditional Korean ceremony would demonstrate respect for the Im family's heritage. A guest list of 120 was considered modest in the circles where Tae-gun operated. Nia's response, delivered through Min-jae, back up the chain to wherever these suggestions originated. No. Tae-gun backed her. No public statement, no announcement. He simply made it clear that the decision had been made and further input was neither needed nor requested. The suggestions stopped. They married on a Saturday in November in a private ceremony attended by 11 people, including Min-jae and 2 women from Nia's life in New York. Her friend Renata, from her previous job, who cried through the entire 30 minutes, and her cousin Dana from Baltimore, who shook Tae-gun's hand with the grip of a woman evaluating whether a man was worth her cousin's time and apparently decided provisionally yes. Nia wore deep green, not white. She hadn't wanted white, and Tae-gun hadn't asked why, which she appreciated. A structured dress in forest green silk that had been altered twice to account for the visible curve of her early pregnancy. She stood in front of a city official in a Manhattan office with her natural hair pinned back and her full figure in that dress, and did not once wish she looked different. That last part was new. She noticed it. When the official asked if she consented, Nia looked at Tae-gun and said yes without the hesitation she had expected to feel. Afterward, Renata hugged her for a long time and whispered, "You look terrifying and beautiful, and I need you to know that's the best thing I have ever said about anyone." Dana cornered Tae-gun near the window and spoke to him in a low voice for about 4 minutes, while his security detail positioned themselves at a discreet distance, looking professionally uncomfortable. Nia couldn't hear the conversation. Whatever Dana said, Tae-gun listened. When Dana stepped away, he found Nia across the room and looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode. "Your cousin is extraordinary," he said. "What did she say to you?" "She outlined the consequences if I make you regret this." A pause. "Very specifically." "Did she scare you?" "She impressed me," he said, which was not the same as an answer, and he knew she knew that, and the almost smile that crossed his face was the closest he came to playfulness. The news moved faster than Nia expected. She had understood intellectually that marrying him, Tae-gun, would make her visible in a world she had spent 4 years operating at the edges of. She had prepared herself for scrutiny. She had not fully prepared herself for the velocity of it. Within 72 hours of the marriage becoming known, the reactions began arriving, not to her directly, but through the atmospheric pressure of Tae-gun's world, which she was now technically inside. Men who had walked past her desk without eye contact for 4 years suddenly made a point of acknowledging her in hallways. Some of it was adjustment, some of it was calculation, some of it was something else. A watchfulness she recognized from being the only black woman in certain rooms, the quality of attention that assessed threat and hierarchy simultaneously. Baek Do-hwan she knew by name and by reputation. She had seen him twice in 4 years. Once at a Mujin Global Board dinner where she had managed the logistics and spent most of the evening invisible. Once during a meeting she had sat in on as a note-taker, positioned at the edge of the room while the men around the table spoke. He was in his late 60s, heavy-set, with a face that had learned to perform warmth well enough that she suspected most people never got beneath it. He had looked at her at that board dinner the way certain men looked at furniture, acknowledging its presence without granting it significance. She had filed that too. 3 weeks after the wedding, Tae-gun brought her to a private gathering of the Mujin Circle's senior captains and allied syndicate leaders. An old private club in Midtown, the kind with no visible signage and a dining room that seated 40. Tae-gun told her the night before. "You don't have to come," he said. "I know I don't," she said. "These men are—" He stopped. "They will have opinions." "I'm aware." "Nia." Tae-gun. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to be managed into the background. If I'm part of your life now, then I'm part of it. Not the convenient parts only." He studied her face. "You know what Baek Do-hwan's daughter was expected to represent," he said. "A marriage alliance you didn't make." She shrugged one shoulder. "I'm sure that's created some feelings." "That's one word for it." "I can handle feelings," she said. "Let's go." She wore burgundy. The dress had been altered for her pregnancy. She was 19 weeks now, the rounding of her stomach no longer concealable under careful tailoring. And the designer had worked with her figure rather than against it, the deep color a contrast against her dark skin that she had chosen with deliberate intention. Her natural hair framed her face unstraightened, uncompromised. When she entered the dining room with Tae-gun's hand at the small of her back, she felt the shift in the room before she saw it. The specific quality of attention that moves through a space when something unexpected has arrived. 40 men at dinner tables. The air of old money and older loyalties. The particular scent of a room where power has been held by the same hands for decades. She walked in with her spine straight and her chin level and let them look. Tae-gun was a physical presence beside her in these rooms in a way she had never fully registered from the outside. The way men's posture adjusted when he entered. The way conversations paused and resumed at a different register. She had seen it from her position as his secretary. From this position, beside him, it felt different. She let it carry her. The first 40 minutes were relatively contained. Introductions, drinks, the social architecture of men who had known each other for decades performing cordiality for the benefit of the room. Nia spoke when spoken to, listened carefully, and noticed everything. She noticed the two captains who greeted her with genuine warmth. Surprised warmth, which was interesting, but real. She noticed the three who avoided direct conversation with her entirely, preferring to address Tae-gun as though she were a slightly complicated prop. She noticed Baek Do-hwan at the far table, who had looked at her once when she entered, and then deliberately arranged his body so that his back was mostly toward her. She had seen that technique before. She recognized it for what it was. It came at dinner. She was seated to Tae-gun's left, the kind of placement that was itself a statement in these rooms. The conversation around the main table had shifted to organizational matters, the kind of broad, elusive discussion these men conducted in public spaces, all implication and carefully placed omission. Baek Do-hwan set down his glass. "We should discuss the matter of the Im family's future representation," he said. The table adjusted. Nia felt rather than heard the shift, the specific quality of attention that meant everyone knew something was coming. "The Im family's representation is present," Tae-gun said. His voice was absolutely level. "I speak of the heir," Baek said. He did not look at Nia. That itself was the move. And of what example is set for the child's future in terms of the family's standing among our allies? A pause. "There are questions about stability, about whether the decisions made in recent months reflect the clarity of leadership our partners require." Tae-gun's jaw tightened. Nia put her hand on his arm. It was a small gesture. She felt the muscle underneath go rigid. Then, slowly, with the particular resistance of a man choosing not to do what every instinct was telling him to do. Still. She removed her hand and looked at Baek Do-hwan. "You have a question about stability," she said. The old man finally looked at her. His eyes were the careful, measuring kind. "I have a question about judgment," he said. and about whether someone without experience in our community has the I managed the logistics network that kept Mujin Global's legitimate holdings solvent through the 2019 port restructuring, Nia said. Her voice was even. She was not performing calm, she actually was calm, which surprised her, the steadiness of it. I identified the financial irregularities in the Inchin subsidiary 14 months before your organization's own auditors flagged them. I rebuilt the New York administrative structure after 3 consecutive department directors left inside 18 months, and I did it without any of you noticing there had been a problem, which was the point. She paused. Let a beat of silence sit there. I have been inside this empire longer than several of the men at this table. I was just in a different room. No one spoke. Beck's expression had gone very still. I'm not asking for your approval, Nia said. I'm telling you what I am. You can update your assessment accordingly. She picked up her water glass and drank. Tae-gun, beside her, said nothing. He didn't need to. The drive home was quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. A different quality, the kind of silence that follows something significant and is processing it. Min-jae was in the front seat, the privacy partition was up. Halfway through Midtown, Tae-gun said, You didn't need me to intervene. No, she agreed. You've been doing that for 4 years, running interference, solving problems before they became visible. That was my job. That was more than your job. She looked out the window. The city moved past in its usual indifferent spectacle, light and glass and the dense human machinery of 10 million people conducting their lives. Baek Do-hwan is not going to let this go, she said. No. He's humiliated. Yes. She turned to look at Tae-gun. What does that mean? Practically. What does a man like that do with humiliation? Tae-gun looked back at her, and in the dark of the car she could see the calculation moving behind his eyes. The part of him that was always running scenarios, always 3 moves ahead, always accounting for the violence that lived at the edges of everything he built. He looks for leverage, Tae-gun said. And right now the most obvious leverage is, you, he said, and the baby. She held his gaze. Then we need to talk about the security arrangements, she said. Not as something you impose, as something we decide together. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Starting tonight. Starting tonight, he agreed. The car moved through the city. Nia turned back to the window and watched the lights and felt the baby move for the first time. A small, impossible flutter low in her stomach, tentative and unmistakable, like a question being asked from the inside. She pressed her palm flat against her abdomen and did not say anything. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere across it, in a private club in Midtown, Baek Do-hwan sat, with what was left of his dinner and his humiliation and whatever he had already decided to do about both. She felt the flutter again. Stronger this time. She kept her hand where it was and looked at the lights and understood, with a clarity that arrived quietly and then refused to leave, that the moment in that dining room had not ended anything. It had started something, and she was 22 weeks from delivery, married to a man whose enemies cataloged weakness for a living, in a world that had just watched her refuse to be invisible, which meant she had chosen, with full knowledge of what it cost, to become a target. The baby moved again. She pressed her hand harder against her stomach and made a promise she didn't say out loud to the small life that had no idea what it had been born into. She was going to make sure it was worth it, whatever that took. The security arrangements took 11 days to finalize. Not because Tae-gun moved slowly, he never moved slowly when he had decided something, but because Nia held him to the agreement they had made in the car. Every decision went through her. Every addition to the protection protocol required her understanding and her consent before it was implemented, which meant 11 days of conversations that ran long and sometimes tense, and occasionally arrived at impasses that had to be negotiated like small treaties. She was not easy about it. She had not promised to be easy. The first real argument happened on day 3, when Min-jae presented a security plan that included a second vehicle following her whenever she left the building and a rotating team of 4 stationed outside whatever space she occupied at any given time. Nia read through the document twice, set it on the kitchen table of the penthouse they now shared, and looked at Tae-gun. No, she said. The threat assessment. I read the threat assessment. I'm saying no to 4 bodies following me into a grocery store. She kept her voice level. 2. Outside the building only, unless I'm going somewhere you have specific intelligence about. I'm not walking around Manhattan looking like I need a military escort. You're carrying my air in a city where 3 separate organizations would use that fact against me if they could. I know what I'm carrying, her voice sharpened on the last word. Don't reduce this pregnancy to an asset management problem. He went quiet. She held the silence. 2, he said finally. But I want the option to expand that without a full negotiation if the threat level changes. Tell me first, don't just deploy people around me and expect me to notice and be fine with it. Agreed. Min-jae, who had been standing at the edge of the kitchen with the specific posture of a man trying to occupy as little space as possible, made a small notation in his file and said nothing. That was day 3. By day 11, the protocol was set. 2-person team outside the building. A secured car whenever she traveled more than 6 blocks. A panic device disguised as a bracelet clasp that she wore without much argument because it was small and she could forget it was there. Check-in calls at intervals, she said herself. It was not nothing. She was not naive about what it cost her in terms of ordinary life. The ease of moving through the city that she had taken for granted for years. The anonymity of being a woman with a Metro card and places to be. That was gone now. But she had chosen this. She kept returning to that. She had looked at the exit and chosen not to take it, and that meant the consequences of staying were hers to carry with the same deliberateness. She was 23 weeks pregnant. The rounding of her stomach was fully visible now, impossible to minimize regardless of what she wore. She had stopped trying to minimize it. That, too, was new. The weeks that followed, the Midtown dinner moved with a different rhythm than anything in her previous 4 years at Mujin Global. She was no longer outside the office. She was in it. Not in the same capacity. Tae-gun had promoted his deputy, a sharp-eyed Korean-American man named Seo, into the secretary role, which freed Nia for something that didn't have a formal title yet, but functioned as a hybrid between senior analyst and operational consultant on the legitimate side of the business. She sat in on the meetings she chose to sit in on. She reviewed the financial structures she had been quietly monitoring for years and was now permitted to address directly. It was, professionally, the most interesting period of her working life. It was also the period during which she began to understand, in granular rather than theoretical terms, exactly how extensive the Mujin Circle's reach was and how many people inside it had opinions about her presence. Most of those opinions arrived filtered, through Minji's briefings, through the atmospheric change in rooms when she entered, through the quality of silence in conversations that stopped a half-second too late when she appeared. She had learned to read these signals the way she had learned to read Tae-gun's silences, not by what was said, but by the shape of what wasn't. Baek Do-hwan said nothing publicly after the dinner. That was the part that bothered her. She had expected some form of response, a countermove, a formal complaint routed through the circle's internal hierarchy, some mechanism of the kind these men used to register displeasure without open confrontation. The silence was more unsettling than any of those would have been. She mentioned it to Tae-gun on a Wednesday evening, sitting across from him in the study of the penthouse while he worked through a port contract and she reviewed a subsidiary's quarterly numbers. Baek hasn't done anything, she said. Tae-gun looked up from the contract. He hasn't done anything visible, he said. That distinction worries me. It should. She set down her pen. What does your intelligence say? That he's been having private meetings. Nothing we can pin to specific content yet. The men he's meeting with are not inside the circle. They're outside connections. That's unusual for him. Outside as in not Korean, not our networks. Tae-gun set his own work down and looked at her directly. He's shopping. For what? That's what we're trying to determine. She absorbed that. The lamp on the desk between them threw warm light across the papers, and outside the penthouse windows, the city was doing its nighttime thing. The slow roar, the distant light, the sense of 10 million individual lives proceeding without concern for the specific crisis unfolding inside this particular room. He can't move against you directly, she said slowly, working it through. You have the circle's majority. He'd lose that fight, and he knows it. Yes. So he finds a pressure point. Yes. She looked at him. Me, she said. You. The baby. The idea that I've compromised the M family's position by He stopped. By marrying a black civilian secretary with no organizational ties and a plus-size body that doesn't fit the aesthetic he thinks the Im dynasty should project, she finished. Tae-gun's jaw tightened. He thinks I'm your weakness, she said. He's wrong about what you are, Tae-gun said. He's not wrong that you're the point he'd push. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we need to know who he's talking to. Min-jae is working on it. How long? Days. Maybe a week. She picked her pen back up and returned to the subsidiary numbers. Her hand was steady. She noticed that. Okay, she said. He watched her for a moment. Okay, he said. 6 days later, Min-jae came to Tae-gun's office with a name. Nia was there. She had made a point of being present for these briefings, not to absorb information that could be used against her, which Tae-gun had worried about initially, but because she had told him plainly that being kept in selective ignorance of the threats against her own life was not protection, it was management, and she would not be managed. Min-jae stood at the edge of the office with a manila folder and his usual expression of compressed neutrality. The meetings were with a man named Pavel Drozd, he said, Ukrainian national. He runs a private security contracting firm that operates in gray markets between Eastern Europe and the American East Coast. His organization has done work for 3 separate syndicates in the past 18 months. A pause. None of them Korean. Mercenaries, Nia said. In the relevant sense, yes. Beck hired outside, so there's no trace back through our own networks, Tae-gun said. That's the working assumption. What's Drozd's specialty? Min-jae's eyes moved to Nia for a fraction of a second, then back to Tae-gun. Extraction and coercion, specifically targeting civilians associated with organizational figures when direct confrontation carries too much risk. The room was very quiet. Nia heard her own breathing, slow, even. She was working to keep it that way. He's not trying to kill me, she said. The intelligence suggests no, Min-jae said carefully. He wants to take me. She looked at Tae-gun. Use the baby to put you on your knees. Tae-gun was looking at her with an expression that had very little of the professional armor in it. He looked, she thought, like a man who had spent 30 years building walls and had just discovered that none of them were tall enough for this particular threat. We expand the security protocol, he said. His voice was controlled. The control was costing him something. Yes, she said. No arguments? I just said yes. She held his gaze. But I want to be kept informed in real time, not filtered, not managed. I want to know what you know when you know it. Nia? Real time, Tae-gun. His jaw moved. Agreed. She looked at Min-jae. How confident are you in this intelligence? 70%, he said. Enough to act on. Not enough to be certain. What's the 30%? The possibility that Drozd was hired for something else, and our sources read on the meeting's purpose is incomplete. Min-jae paused. It's not a reassuring 30%. No, she agreed. It's not. She was 32 weeks when the first sign appeared. Not an overt threat. Nothing she could have pointed to and named cleanly. It was smaller than that. The particular kind of wrong that arrives in peripheral vision rather than directly, that registers as unease before it registers as evidence. She had a standing Thursday appointment at a specialist practice in the upper 50s, a maternal fetal medicine clinic that Tae-gun had arranged at 26 weeks, when a routine scan flagged a minor placental irregularity that the obstetrician had characterized as worth monitoring but not alarming. The irregularity had resolved by week 29. Nia continued the appointments because she liked the clinic's doctor, a steady Korean-American woman named Dr. Park, who spoke to her like an adult and answered questions directly. The Thursday of week 32, the car took a different route. She noticed because she had been taking this route for 6 weeks and her body knew the rhythm of it. The specific left turn after the second light, the stretch of avenue that ran past a particular coffee shop she had ordered from twice, and liked the smell of when the window was open. The car went straight instead of turning. Why are we going this way? She said to the driver. One of Tae-gun's regular security staff, a man named Park Hyun, who had been on her personal detail for 4 weeks. Traffic, ma'am. Alternate route. She looked out the window. The street behind them was moving normally. She picked up her phone and texted Min-jae. Different route to clinic today. Park Hyun says traffic. Can you confirm? The response came in 40 seconds. Confirmed alternate. Construction redirect on the usual block. We swept the route this morning. She let out the breath she had been holding and put the phone in her bag. At the clinic, Dr. Park ran the standard monitoring, fetal heart rate, position check, the fundal measurement that had been tracking ahead of dates for the past 3 weeks. Everything was where it should be. The baby was moving well, positioned correctly, growing with the particular determined persistence of a life that had not been asked its opinion about any of the circumstances surrounding it. "You're doing well," Dr. Park said, pulling the ultrasound wand away and handing Nia a paper towel for the gel. "Blood pressure is slightly elevated from last week. It's been a stressful period. Anything specific I should know about?" Nia looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Nothing clinical," she said. Dr. Park gave her the look of a woman who heard the distinction clearly. "Stress at this stage is worth managing. Not for you. You seem like you manage it fine. For the baby, cortisol crosses the placenta." "I know. Is there anything you can reduce?" Nia almost laughed. "I'm working on it." She dressed and gathered her things and was in the waiting room pulling on her coat when she saw him. A man she didn't recognize seated near the door. Heavy-set, light-eyed, with the specific quality of stillness that she had learned in the past months inside Tae-gun's world to identify as deliberate rather than natural. He was reading a magazine or performing the reading of one. The pages hadn't turned in the 6 minutes since she had emerged from the hallway. She looked at him for 3 seconds. He didn't look up. She walked past him, out the clinic door, to where Park Hyun was waiting with the car. In the car, she texted Min Jae again. Man in waiting room. Late 40s, heavy build, light eyes, gray jacket. Didn't move for 6 minutes. The response took longer this time, almost 2 minutes. Description matched to a Drozd's associate. "We have a photo from the Hamburg surveillance file. Can you confirm if it matches when you're back?" She typed, "How long has he been in that clinic?" Min Jae, "We don't know." She stared at the phone. "He was scoping the location," she typed. Min Jae, "That's the assumption. Does Tae-gun know?" Min Jae, "Telling him now." She put the phone down and looked out the car window and did the thing she had been training herself to do since the night of the dinner at the Midtown Club. She cataloged what she felt and set it aside and thought about what was actually useful. They knew the clinic. They knew her Thursday appointment. They knew the route, or had been testing route options. She was 32 weeks pregnant. She had 6 to 8 weeks before delivery, assuming normal progress. Baek Do-hwan's window was closing. Tae-gun was waiting in the penthouse when she arrived. Not sitting, standing in the living room with his phone in his hand and the controlled, dangerous stillness that she had learned to distinguish from ordinary stillness. The kind that happened when his body had made a decision and was waiting for his mind to authorize it. She dropped her bag and kept her coat on. "Before you say anything," she started. "You were right about the timeline," he said. "He's moving faster than we estimated." The man in the waiting room, Casper Wolf. He's Drozd's operational lead. He handles logistics and reconnaissance for target acquisitions. The words were even. The evenness was costing him. He wasn't there by accident. I know he wasn't. They've been watching the clinic for at minimum 2 weeks. We missed it. A pause. The admission landed hard. She could see it land, see the weight of it cross his face. My people missed it. What does it mean for the Thursday appointments? You're not going back to that clinic. She looked at him. I have a high-risk pregnancy and a doctor I trust and appointments I need, she said. We'll arrange Dr. Park to come here, or we use the private medical suite at the Mujin building. He held up a hand before she could speak. I know this is the line we discussed. This isn't control. They know the location. Using it again puts you in a space where Drozd's people have already mapped every exit and every staff member and... Okay, she said. He stopped. Okay, she said again. The clinic is compromised. We find another arrangement. She unzipped her coat. But I'm involved in the planning. I talked to Dr. Park directly. I'm not shuffled into a medical situation I haven't agreed to. Yes, and I want to know everything Min Jae has on Wolf. Not a summary, the file. I'll send it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. 34 weeks of pregnancy and 6 months of marriage and the slowly accumulated weight of a life that had become something neither of them had planned, and he was standing in their living room looking at her like a man who had run out of walls to put between what he felt and the fact of her. I'm not going to pretend I'm not scared, she said. I know. But I'm also not going to let the fear make decisions for me. She held his gaze. We deal with Bayek, directly. Whatever that means, we deal with him. I'm already preparing. Together, she said. Not you deciding and me being informed after. Together. The muscle in his jaw worked. Together, he said. Ota. The file on Casper Wolf arrived on her tablet at 9 that evening. She read it in bed while Tae-gun made calls in the study. She could hear the low cadence of his voice through the wall, the clipped Korean she had learned to read for emotional register, even without understanding every word. Wolf's file was thorough and ugly. 12 years of operational work across 4 countries, 3 documented civilian extractions. 2 of the targets from those operations were women. She read to the end. Then she set the tablet on the nightstand and lay on her left side, which was the only comfortable position now, and put her hand against her stomach. The baby moved. A slow roll, substantial enough that she could see the movement through the fabric of her shirt. I know, she said quietly. To the room, to herself. To the life inside her that kept moving like it had no idea how much the world outside was trying to reach it. She stared at the ceiling. Then she picked up the tablet again and opened a new document and started writing. Everything she knew about Mujin Global's legitimate financial structure, every irregularity she had flagged over 4 years, every pressure point in the organization's public-facing operations that a properly positioned person could use to either protect or destabilize. Not because she was planning to use it as leverage, not yet, but because she had spent 32 weeks of pregnancy learning that the moments that cost you the most are always the ones you didn't prepare for. She was not going to be unprepared. The document grew as the city quieted outside, as Tae-gun's voice in the study grew intermittent and then stopped, as the particular silence of the small hours settled over the penthouse. She wrote until her eyes blurred. Then she encrypted the document with a password she chose herself and didn't write down anywhere, and saved it to a personal drive that lived in her coat pocket rather than on any Mujin server. Then she closed the tablet and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and listened to the city and felt the baby move and thought about Baek Do-hwan sitting somewhere in this same city with his humiliation and his hired operative and his window that was closing by the day. He was going to move soon. She knew it the way she knew weather before it arrived. Not from evidence exactly, but from the accumulated reading of 1,000 small signals that had been pointing in one direction long enough that the direction was no longer in question. He was going to move. And when he did, she needed to be something other than a target. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 17 days after she had seen Casper Wolf in the clinic waiting room. She was 34 weeks. The baby was estimated at 5 pounds, 4 ounces. The placental position had been confirmed normal by the portable monitoring equipment Dr. Park now used during home visits, and the weekly non-stress tests had been uniformly reassuring. The appointment was scheduled for 9:30. Dr. Park had wanted to do this one at the Mujin Building's private medical suite, a room Tae-gun had equipped at considerable expense, and that Nia had inspected herself and approved, which she considered a small private victory. But Tae-gun had a call with the Seoul office that could not be moved. A structural reorganization of the Circle's Pacific operations that had been in negotiation for 6 weeks and was reaching its critical phase. I can postpone the appointment, Nia said. You shouldn't. The weekly monitoring is important. He was standing at the kitchen counter with his phone and his coffee and the contained tension of a man who was in 3 places simultaneously and managing none of them as well as he wanted to. Min-jae will be with you. Full team. I know the protocol. Nia. He looked at her over the coffee cup. Something in his face, the stripped-down version, the one without the management layer. Call me. When you're done. Before you leave the suite. I always call. Call me. I will, she said. She kissed him on the side of his jaw. She had started doing that, the casual physical acknowledgement of a life shared, and he always went slightly still when she did it, like his body hadn't finished learning to expect it. Then she picked up her coat and her bag and went to meet Min-jae in the lobby. The Mujin Building's private medical suite was on the 14th floor, a deliberately ordinary floor, not the executive levels, accessible from a separate elevator bank that wasn't visible from the main lobby. Dr. Park was already there when they arrived, setting up the portable monitoring equipment with the efficiency of someone who had adapted quickly to unusual clinical arrangements. Nia settled into the examination chair and let the routine take over. Blood pressure cuff, fetal monitors strapped across her abdomen, the familiar sound of the baby's heartbeat filling the small room with its rapid, steady percussion. Min-jae was outside the door. 2 additional security staff were positioned at the elevator bank. Everything was correct. Tae-gun's call with Seoul was running long. She could imagine it, the contained tension of those conversations, the weight of the Pacific reorganization bearing down on a schedule that hadn't allowed for complications. His phone was occupied, which meant when Min-jae stepped into the hallway to take an urgent call from the building's security desk, and the door to the medical suite clicked open 30 seconds later, Tae-gun's line was busy. Dr. Park looked up from the monitor. 2 men came through the door. Not running, not loud, moving with the specific controlled efficiency of people who had rehearsed this moment enough times that the performance of it required no urgency. The first one Nia didn't recognize. The second one was Casper Wolf. He looked at her with the flat, professional attention of a man executing a task, and Nia felt something happen in her body. A cold, electrical clarity that moved from her chest outward, that was not panic and was not calm, but was something between them, something she didn't have a word for, the animal knowledge that the thing you had been preparing for had arrived. Dr. Park stood up from the monitor station and said, very steadily, "You need to leave this room." Wolf looked at her. "Sit down," he said. His English was accented and direct. Dr. Park did not sit down. Nia pulled the fetal monitor leads off her abdomen, not frantically, with the deliberate efficiency of a woman who had decided what the next 10 seconds required. And her hand found the edge of the examination table, and she used it to push herself upright. Wolf's eyes moved to her. "Don't," he said. "My security is outside that door," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was furious at herself for the shake underneath the steadiness, the biological betrayal of a body that had not caught up with the decision she had already made. "Your security chief received a call about an active threat on the building's ground floor," Wolf said. "He has about 4 minutes before he determines it was false. So," he looked at her with the flat patience of a man on a clock, "we can do this without difficulty, or with it. My instructions are to bring you in without harming the pregnancy. But without is simpler for everyone." "Without," she said. "Good." He moved toward her. Nia grabbed the blood pressure monitor from the equipment cart. It was not a weapon. She knew that. It was a piece of medical equipment that weighed approximately 4 pounds, and had a cord and a cuff, and would do very little against a man Wolf's size and training. She threw it at his face anyway. It bought her approximately 3 seconds. The instinctive defensive flinch, the half-step back, the fraction of a moment where his momentum was interrupted. She used those 3 seconds to put the examination table between herself and the door and to press the bracelet clasp on her wrist with her thumb, hard, holding it for the required 3-second count. The panic signal. Wolf reached her in the next moment. His hand closed around her arm. Not violent, controlled, the grip of a man who had been instructed to be careful with her. And she felt the weight of him trying to redirect her toward the door, and she planted her feet the way Dana had taught her years ago in a self-defense class she had taken mostly to make Dana feel better about Nia living alone in New York. She planted her feet and dropped her weight and made herself as difficult to move as possible. It was not enough. He was significantly stronger and significantly trained, and she was 34 weeks pregnant, and the physics of this situation were not in her favor, and some part of her that was running cold calculations underneath the adrenaline knew that. But the 3 seconds from the monitor throw and the 3 seconds from the panic signal had bought 6 seconds total. Min-jae came through the door in 7. The sound of it, the door hitting the wall, the immediate physical weight of Min-jae's entry, was the most specific relief Nia had ever felt in her life. She felt it in her back teeth. Wolf released her arm. The second man was already moving toward the door, and Min-jae's colleagues from the elevator bank were in the room a beat later, and the room became briefly, chaotically loud in a way that Nia processed from a distance, because she had backed into the wall beside the examination table and was pressing her spine against it and her hand against her stomach and focusing on the single most important thing. The monitoring equipment was still running, and she could still hear the heartbeat, fast but steady. She stood against the wall and listened to it and breathed. Min-jae had Wolf contained. The second man was down. Dr. Park was in the corner with her back to the room and her phone to her ear, her voice low and precise. calling in the kind of clinical emergency report that told Nia she was already thinking about what happened next. Nia's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Tae-gun. She answered it. "I'm okay," she said immediately. A silence on the line that lasted exactly 1 second and contained more emotion than most people managed in a full conversation. "What happened?" His voice was the flattest she had ever heard it. "Wolf, building's medical suite. Min-jae has them." A breath. "The baby is fine. I'm hearing the heartbeat right now." Another silence, shorter. "I'm coming up," he said. "I know," she said. The line stayed open. She kept it to her ear and listened to him move through the building, the sound of the elevator, the quick exchange with security in the hallway, and kept her other hand against her stomach and listened to the monitor. When Tae-gun came through the door, he crossed the room in 4 strides, found her face, and he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before and hoped, somewhere rational and distant from the adrenaline, she would never have to see again, because it was the face of a man who had built an empire on the principle that he controlled outcomes, and had just spent 7 minutes in an elevator understanding that there were outcomes beyond his reach. She was shaking. She hadn't noticed until now. The fine, continuous tremor of an adrenaline crash. "I'm okay," she said again. "I know," he said, in the voice he reserved for things that were true, but not the whole truth. Behind him, Min-jae was on his phone, and the words coming through were clipped and specific, and Nia understood enough of them. The Korean words for verified and confirmed and baek do hwan, to understand that the 30% uncertainty had just collapsed. It was no longer 70%. They had sent Wolf. They had used a false threat to pull Min-jae from the door. They had timed it to Tae-gun's occupied phone line. Baek do hwan had not made a mistake. He had made a plan. And the plan had almost worked. Tae-gun looked up from Nia's face at Min-jae's voice, and she watched the transformation happen in real time. The fear converting, efficiently and completely, into something colder and more absolute. She put her hand on his chest. "Our child comes first," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze. "Our child comes first," she repeated. "Whatever happens next, whatever you decide needs to happen, our child comes first." His hand covered hers against his chest. His heartbeat was fast. "Yes," he said, but she could see, in the set of his jaw and the darkness behind his eyes, that Baek do hwan had just run out of the time Tae-gun might have otherwise given him to find a way out of this gracefully. There was no graceful way out now. There was only what came next. They moved Nia to the secured medical floor of Manhattan Central Hospital within the hour. Not the private suite. That location was compromised now, along with the 14th floor and the elevator bank, and 3 weeks of carefully constructed security protocol that had turned out to have a gap Baek do hwan's people had found and used with surgical precision. Tae-gun made the call himself, standing in the hallway outside the medical suite with Wolf contained behind him and Min-jae beside him, and his hand still carrying the faint warmth of Nia's palm pressed against his chest. Manhattan Central had a private floor, the kind that didn't appear in the hospital's public directory, that was accessible only through a secured elevator requiring biometric clearance, that had been used by 3 other organizational figures in the past decade when discretion and medical care needed to occupy the same space. Tae-gun had a standing arrangement with the floor's administrator. He had never expected to use it for this. Nia did not argue about the move. That, more than anything, told him how shaken she was. The woman who had negotiated every security arrangement for 11 days, who had pushed back on 4-person details and insisted on knowing everything in real time, sat in the back of the secured car with her coat zipped to her chin and her hand flat against her stomach and did not say a word about the change in plan. Dr. Park rode with them. Min-jae was in the front. 2 additional vehicles flanked them through midtown traffic, which moved with its usual indifferent density, accommodating nothing, caring less. At the hospital, they took the secured elevator. The floor administrator, a compact Korean-American woman named Han, who had the specific energy of someone accustomed to managing situations that did not appear in standard hospital protocols, met them at the elevator bank with a wheelchair that Nia looked at and then sat in without comment, which told Tae-gun the same thing the silence in the car had told him. They got her into a room. Dr. Park reattached the monitors. The fetal heart rate read 148, elevated from the baseline of 132 that had been consistent for the past 3 weeks, but within normal range given the circumstances. Dr. Park said so. Clearly, twice. Tae-gun stood at the side of the room and listened and looked at his wife in a hospital bed at 34 weeks pregnant and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a name for and did not try to name. "The baby is okay," Nia said. Not to him specifically, to the room. "Yes," Dr. Park said. "We'll monitor for the next several hours. Stress hormones can cause contractions. I want to make sure we're not seeing any activity." "We're not," Nia said, with the particular certainty of a woman who had been paying close attention to what her body was telling her for the past 34 weeks. "Probably not," Dr. Park agreed. "But we watch anyway." Nia looked at Tae-gun. He looked back at her. "Go," she said. "I'm not. You have things to handle, and we both know it." Her voice was steady now. The shake from the medical suite was gone, replaced by something he recognized, the same quality of attention she brought to the quarterly numbers, to the logistics negotiations, to every problem she had solved from the outside edge of his world for 4 years. The part of her that assessed and acted. "Min-jae stays with me. You go do what needs doing." "Nia." "Tae-gun." She held his gaze. "Baek Do-hwan sent men to take me out of a room where I was strapped to a fetal monitor. Whatever you need to do about that, do it. I'm not asking you to stand here and hold my hand." He crossed the room and stood over her bed and looked at her face, the exhaustion around her eyes, the set of her jaw, the specific kind of courage that was not the absence of fear, but was what you found on the other side of it when you kept going anyway. And then he bent and pressed his mouth against her forehead and stayed there for a moment that was not long enough and too long, and the only moment of the day that had nothing professional in it. "Call me," she said quietly. "When it's done." He straightened. "Min-jae," he said. "Sir." Min-jae was already positioned near the door, alert, with the contained readiness of a man who had been running on operational adrenaline for 3 hours and had not yet allowed himself to process the fact that he had left that door. "Nothing moves through this floor without my authorization. Nothing." "Understood." Tae-gun took one more look at Nia. She was already looking at Dr. Park, asking a question about the monitor reading, redirecting herself toward the next manageable thing the way she always did. He walked out. The car was waiting at the hospital's secured exit. He made 3 calls in the elevator. By the time he reached the car, the information he needed was arriving in pieces. From the 2 operatives who had been tracking Baek Do-hwan's movements for the past 72 hours. From the organizational liaison who managed the circle's internal communications. From a contact inside a competing network who owed Tae-gun a debt significant enough to make loyalty a practical matter. The picture assembled itself with the specific efficiency of information that had been accumulating pressure for months and had finally found a release point. Baek Do-hwan was not at his Manhattan apartment. He was not at the private club in Midtown. He was not at any of the 3 locations his regular pattern would have suggested. He was at a property in Red Hook, a waterfront warehouse that had appeared in Mujin Global's logistics records 8 years ago under a shell company that Nia, as it happened, had flagged during a subsidiary audit 14 months ago, and that nobody had acted on because the flag had been categorized as a low-priority discrepancy rather than an active concern. Tae-gun looked at that information for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at the driver. "Red Hook," he said. "The dockside logistics address." The driver moved without question. Tae-gun pulled up the subsidiary audit flag on his phone. The one Nia had filed 14 months ago, the one that had been miscategorized and buried in a queue where it had waited patiently for someone to understand what it actually was. He read her notes. 3 paragraphs, precise and clear, and entirely correct in their assessment of the shell company's unusual transaction patterns. She had found it 14 months ago. He had not known it was there. He put the phone down and looked out the window at the city moving past, and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of something he would not have named aloud before he closed it off and turned his attention to what the next hour required. The Red Hook warehouse was dark from the outside. 2 vehicles in the adjacent lot, a black sedan registered to a shell entity that Min-jae's intelligence had associated with Drowsy's contracting operation 3 weeks ago, and a late-model SUV that came back clean on registration but had been seen outside the Mujin building twice in the past 10 days. Both had been noticed. Neither had triggered the response they should have, which was a failure he would address with his intelligence team at length when this was over. He had 4 men with him, not an army. He had not wanted an army. An army required planning time and coordination and produced collateral he would spend months managing. 4 men, chosen for specific capabilities, was sufficient for a 70-year-old captain who had made his move and was now waiting in a warehouse in Red Hook to find out if it had worked. They came in through the building's secondary access, a loading dock entrance that Nia's audit notes had described in accurate detail, because she had pulled the original property records when flagging the shell company and had been thorough about it, as she was thorough about everything. The interior was large, partially partitioned with old industrial shelving, lit by utility lighting that threw long shadows and left significant portions of the space in practical darkness. It smelled of river water and old machinery and the specific mustiness of a space that was used occasionally and maintained minimally. Baek Do-hwan was at the far end, seated at a folding table with 2 phones and a glass of something amber-colored that he hadn't touched. He had 2 men standing behind him. Not the contracted mercenaries, his own people, the kind of loyalty that came from shared history rather than payment. He looked up when Tae-gun walked in. He did not look surprised. That was the first thing Tae-gun registered, the absence of surprise on Baek's face. The old captain had expected this, had perhaps planned for it, which meant this was not quite what it appeared to be. Tae-gun walked across the warehouse floor without hurrying. His 4 men spread naturally into the space behind him, covering angles with the practiced efficiency of people who did this without requiring instructions. He stopped 8 feet from the table. Baek looked at him the way very old men looked at outcomes they had decided to accept, with the particular tiredness of someone who had run the calculation and arrived at a number they didn't like but couldn't argue with. "Your wife is unhurt," Baek said. "Yes." That was the instruction. Wolf was to bring her in without harm to her or the child. A pause. "I want you to know that." "Oh, what Wolf's instructions were," Tae-gun said. "I have Wolf." Something moved across Baek's face, not fear, closer to resignation. "Then you have what you need," Baek said. "I have part of what I need." Tae-gun took 1 step closer. "I want to know who else was involved. Who in the circle knew about the arrangement with Drozd?" Baek was quiet. "There were others," Tae-gun said. Not a question. "There are always others," Baek said. "You know that. You've known that since you were 22 years old, and your father sat you down and explained how this works." He picked up the amber glass, set it down without drinking. "Men are loyal to outcomes. When the outcome looks uncertain, loyalty becomes flexible. Name them." "And then what?" "And then we determine what comes next based on what you tell me." Baek looked at him. The old captain had a face that had been through decades of these conversations, negotiations and confrontations, and the specific currency of men who dealt in information and consequence. He knew how to read a room and a man, and the distance between what was said and what was meant. "You came here yourself," Baek said slowly. 4 men. No larger team, no circle authority, no formal proceeding. He studied Tae-gun's face. "You're angry." "Yes." "But you're not." Baek stopped. Something shifted in his expression. The reading of a man recalculating. "You're not going to handle this the way I expected." Tae-gun said nothing. "Your wife," Baek said. The word came out differently than it had a moment ago. Not a tactical reference, but something more complex. She said something at the dinner about the work she had done inside the organization. A pause. "I dismissed it. I was wrong to." "Yes," Tae-gun said. "You were." "The subsidiary audit, the dockside shell." Baek looked at the table. "She found this location." Her notes found it. 14 months ago. The silence in the warehouse was the kind that had weight to it. The sound of old machinery settling, the distant pulse of the river, 2 men in a room where one of them had made a move that had failed and was now determining what the failure cost him. "Kim Sung-woo," Baek said, "and Park Jae-hoon. They knew about the Drozd arrangement. They provided the funding routing and the intelligence on your wife's medical appointments." He said it flatly, without theater. The accounting of a man who had decided that partial cooperation was the only remaining currency he had. No one else inside the circle at the senior level. Below that, Two mid-level operators who handled the communication with Wolf. Tae-gun absorbed the names, Kim and Park, both senior captains, both men who had been in the Circle's structure for more than 15 years. Both men who had sat at the Midtown dinner and watched Nia answer Beck's challenge without changing expression. "Why?" Tae-gun said. Beck looked at him. "You know why." "I want to hear you say it." The old captain set the glass down with a sound that rang briefly in the warehouse's emptiness. "Because you took a woman nobody sanctioned and made her the face of the Im family," he said. The anger was there now. Not hot, the cold kind, the kind that had been sitting at a low temperature for months. Because you bypassed every protocol, every alliance consideration, We have a structure, Em. That structure exists because it has to, because without it, we are just criminals. He stopped. Your father understood that. My father is dead, Tae-gun said. Yes. Beck's voice flattened. And you are what remains. And what remains decided. Tae-gun's voice had gone to the place it went when the decision was already made and the conversation was formality. The Im family's choices are the Im family's to make, not managed by alliance politics or what some dead man would have wanted. A beat. Or by what you think the heir of this organization should look like. Beck said nothing. Kim and Park will be handled through the Circle's formal process, Tae-gun said. You will cooperate fully with that process. Every detail of the draws arrangement, the funding routing, the intelligence gathering on my wife. Everything goes on record. And me. Tae-gun looked at him for a long moment. You're finished, he said. Your territory, your alliances, your operational role, all of it. You keep what's yours personally. You don't set foot in Circle business again. You don't make contact with anyone in my organization's structure. A pause. And you live quietly with what you tried to do and what it cost you. Beck's jaw moved. That's more than I expected, he said, finally. My wife told me our child needs a father more than my empire needs blood on the floor. Tae-gun held the old man's gaze. I'm trying to be what my child needs. He turned to leave. He stopped but did not turn. The woman, Beck said. She's not what I thought she was. No, Tae-gun said. She's not. He walked back across the warehouse floor and through the loading dock entrance and out into the cold Red Hook air, which smelled like the river and old stone and the particular sharpness of late autumn coming in off the water. His phone rang as he reached the car. Min-jae. He answered before the second ring. Contractions, Min-jae said. Dr. Park says they started 7 minutes ago. She wants you here. The air left Tae-gun's lungs. How far apart? 6 minutes. I'm 20 minutes out. Drive faster, Min-jae said, which was not something Kwon Min-jae had ever said to him in 11 years of working together, and that fact alone told Tae-gun everything about the urgency of the next 20 minutes. He was in the car before Min-jae finished the sentence. The hospital's secured elevator took 45 seconds to reach the private floor. Tae-gun spent those 45 seconds with his hands flat against the elevator wall and his eyes on the floor indicator, and every scenario he had refused to fully imagine over the past 34 weeks arriving in the small space with him simultaneously. The doors opened. The floor had changed energy in the 20 minutes since he'd left, the particular heightened alertness of a medical space where something was actively happening. Han, the floor administrator, was moving between two rooms. A nurse he hadn't seen before was at the station with a phone to her ear. Dr. Park was in the doorway of Nia's room, and she turned when the elevator opened. She's in active labor, Dr. Park said. The stress from this afternoon triggered it. The contractions are consistent and progressing. A pause. At 34 weeks, the baby will need NICU support. We have the team standing by. This is manageable, but it's happening. She's okay, Tae-gun said. Not quite a question. She's exhausted and in pain, and she's handling it. Dr. Park looked at him with the specific directness of a physician who had decided that what this man needed was facts rather than softening. She's been asking for you. He moved past her into the room. Nia was in the elevated hospital bed with the monitors reconnected and an IV line in her left arm and the specific look of a person running on the last of their resources. Her hair had come loose and she hadn't pushed it back. Her hands were gripping the bed rail. Not dramatically, the tight, controlled grip of someone managing pain through the simple physics of having something to hold on to. She looked at him when he came in. "You took a while," she said. Her voice was strained but present. "I'm here." He crossed to the bed and put his hand over hers on the rail. She didn't let go of the rail. She turned her hand so her fingers were through his and held on. "Is it done?" she said. "Bayek and his people are handled." A breath. "Kim and Park." He looked at her. "I heard Min Jae on the phone," she said. "Before you left. Kim Sung-woo and Park Jae-hoon. They were in on it." "Yes." Are they? Circle process, not the other kind." He held her gaze. "You were right. About what comes first." Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe. Or the particular exhaustion of being right about something that cost you everything to be right about. Then the next contraction arrived. He felt it through her hand before she made a sound. The sudden clamping grip, the held breath, the full-body concentration of a woman applying everything she had to getting through the next 60 seconds. He held on, did not tell her to breathe, did not say anything that required a response, just held on. When it passed, she exhaled through her teeth and loosened her grip by degrees. "How long have they been like that?" he said. "A while." She didn't specify. He didn't push. Dr. Park came in and checked the monitors and spoke quietly about dilation and progression and what the next several hours were likely to look like. The NICU team had been notified. The baby's position was good. 34 weeks was early but not critically so. The lungs were developed enough. The weight was on the edge of adequate. The outlook was realistic rather than alarming. Nia listened to all of it with the focused attention of a woman who processed information best when she was allowed to hear it directly and completely. She asked 2 questions. Both of them were the right questions. Dr. Park answered them honestly and left. "She's good," Nia said when the door closed. "Yes. I need her to be good at this. I need someone in this room who is good at this." "She is." He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat without releasing her hand. "You are." She looked at him sideways. "I'm not good at this. This is..." A breath. "This is the thing I have no preparation for." "You've been preparing for 34 weeks. That's not the same." Her jaw tightened as another contraction built, smaller than the last, or she had learned to anticipate the peak and was managing the anticipation better. He couldn't tell. "The logistics I can do, the security protocols, the financial analysis, I know how to handle problems I can think through." A pause as the contraction crested. "This is not a problem I can think through." "No," he agreed. "Helpful. You told me not to say useless things. Despite everything, the monitors and the IV and the exhaustion and the 34 weeks of managed fear arriving all at once in a hospital room, something crossed her face that was almost the almost smile. "I did," she said. He held her hand and said nothing useless, and watched the monitors and listened to the rapid, steady percussion of his child's heartbeat filling the room. The hours accumulated the way difficult hours do, not in a straight line, but in the compressed, expanding rhythm of a body doing the oldest and most violent work a body can do. Tae-gun watched Nia move through it with the specific attention of a man who had spent his adult life assessing people under pressure, and had never assessed anyone the way he was assessing her now. She was not graceful about it. She told him once, during a long plateau between contractions, that she had always imagined she would be calm in situations like this, and that the reality was that she was not calm and she wanted him to know that. "I know," he said. "I'm angry," she said. "At what?" "At all of it. At Bayek. At the timing. At the fact that I'm in a hospital bed because some old man couldn't handle being told he was wrong by a black woman in a burgundy dress." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and she pressed her lips together. "I'm 34 weeks. He was supposed to stay in there another 6 weeks minimum, and He's coming," Tae-gun said. "And he's okay. Park confirmed." She said probably okay. She said the outlook is realistic. That's a medical way of saying probably. He didn't argue. She pulled in a breath as another contraction built. "Talk to me," she said. "About something. Anything." He thought for a moment. Then he told her about the audit note, the one she had filed 14 months ago about the Dockside Shell Company and the Red Hook warehouse, how it had been miscategorized, how it had sat in a queue. how Baek Do-hwan had been using that exact warehouse as his base tonight, and how Tae-gun had found him there in part because of information Nia had recorded more than a year before the crisis that made it relevant. She listened through the contraction, and on the other side of it said, "I knew something was wrong with that entity." "You were right. I flagged it 3 times. "I know." "The third flag went to—" She stopped, breathed. "It went to Kim Sung-woo's division for review." Tae-gun went still. She looked at him. "He buried it," she said. "Yes. He buried my audit flag, because he already knew what the shell company was for." She absorbed that for a moment, with the specific look she got when she was running numbers. Not financial numbers, the other kind, the ones that added up to what a situation actually meant. "He's been protecting that warehouse for over a year." "Yes." "And the flag would have exposed it." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped steadily. Outside the room, the private floor continued its muted operational hum. "I did more damage to Baek's operation by filing 3 paperwork flags than I would have if I'd been trying to," she said. "Yes." She almost laughed. The same almost laugh from the penthouse kitchen, from the car after the midtown dinner. The specific sound of a woman who had found, in the middle of something terrible, a single note of dark absurdity. "I want a title," she said. "What?" "When this is over, when I'm back, a real title. Executive position, real authority, real responsibility." Her voice was tired but absolutely precise. "I've been doing executive work for 4 years from a secretary's desk. That changes." "Yes," he said immediately. "Don't agree just because I'm in labor." "I'm agreeing because you're right," he said. "I should have changed it a year ago." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Hold that thought until I'm not attached to 3 monitors." Held. The night deepened. Dr. Park came in at intervals, calm and methodical and direct, and the numbers on the monitors told a story that was difficult and progressing and, critically, not dangerous. The baby's heart rate stayed stable. The contractions built their own brutal rhythm. At some point past midnight, Nia reached a wall. Tae-gun recognized it because he had seen people reach walls, in rooms very different from this one, in circumstances he was not going to think about in this hospital room. And the expression that crossed her face had the specific quality of someone who had used everything they had and was looking at the far side of empty. "I can't," she said. Quiet. Not theatrical. The flat statement of a body that had reached its honest limit. He leaned forward. His hand found her face. Both hands, thumbs at her jaw, the way you hold something that matters enough to require both hands. She looked at him. "Listen to me," he said. She was looking, but he wasn't sure she was focused. Nia. Her name, the way he'd said it in the office that first morning, before the walls came down, before the almost smiles and the negotiated security protocols, and the burgundy dress, and 11 years of wait compressed into the particular look on Baek Do-hwan's face when she answered him. "You stood in that medical suite and threw a monitor at a man twice your size while you were protecting our son." He watched her eyes come back into focus. "You found the warehouse 14 months ago, and you were right. You walked into that dinner, and you were right. You have been right about every single hard thing in the past 9 months." He held her gaze. "You do not stop now." Her jaw worked. "I'm so tired," she said. "I know. I need you to know that." "I know," he said again. "Keep going anyway." Something moved through her face, the exhaustion still there, fully, honestly there. But underneath it, something that was older than the exhaustion and had been there longer. She nodded once, and she pushed. The delivery room had the quality of a space where time compresses, where minutes are both very long and very short simultaneously, where the only thing that exists is the specific work of the next moment and then the one after that. Tae-gun did not leave. He had considered, in some remote and theoretical part of himself that planned for contingencies, that he might not be someone who could stay through this. He was aware that he had spent 30 years building an identity around control and composure and the management of outcomes. He was aware that this was not a controllable outcome. He stayed. He held her hand when she needed it and let go when she needed that instead. He didn't count the minutes or watch the clock. He listened to the monitors and Dr. Park's voice and Nia's breathing and focused on those things and nothing else. When Dr. Park said push, he watched Nia push with everything she had left, and then the things past everything, the reserves she found in the places that don't get named because they don't have names. When Dr. Park said once more, he felt Nia's hand crush his with a force that would leave marks he would notice the next morning and not care about. When the sound came, the small, enormous, outraged, living sound that cut through the delivery room and hit Tae-gun in the chest like something physical. He was not prepared for it. He had thought he was prepared. He had 30 years of preparation for difficult moments, for outcomes that required him to stay contained, to assess and respond, and not allow what he felt to precede what he needed to do. None of that preparation covered this. The baby was placed on Nia's chest, small, red-faced, furiously alive, the NICU team standing by, and Dr. Park already calling out numbers that were, by some grace of biology and will and the particular stubbornness of both parents, within the range of adequacy. Nia made a sound that was not a word. She looked down at the baby and then up at Tae-gun, and her face was the most completely unguarded thing he had ever seen in his life. "He's okay," Dr. Park said. "He's small, but he's okay." The NICU team moved with precise efficiency. Warming equipment, monitoring leads, the practice choreography of people who did this specific and critical work. And through all of it, the baby made his presence known with a sustained and increasingly indignant sound that filled the room and bounced off the walls and registered somewhere in Tae-gun's chest as the most significant noise he had ever heard. He was handed the baby. He did not know when he had moved across the room to where the NICU team had the warming station, but he was there. And the nurse who placed his son in his arms gave him a single clear instruction about supporting the head, and then he was holding approximately 5 pounds of the most consequential thing that had ever been in his hands. His son looked at him, or looked in his direction, the unfocused gaze of a newborn, finding light and warmth and the surface of a face that would eventually become familiar. Tae-gun, who had not cried in longer than he could accurately remember, who had built 30 years of his life on the discipline of not allowing what he felt to show on his face in rooms full of dangerous men, stood in a delivery room in Manhattan Central Hospital and felt his eyes fill and did not do a single thing to stop it. He walked back to Nia's bed. She was watching him. "He looks like you," she said. Her voice was wrecked with exhaustion. She had never sounded more like herself. He knelt beside the bed because his legs required it. Not weakness, or not only weakness, but the specific gravity of a moment that demanded a person lower themselves to meet it. He held his son at the level of Nia's face so she could see him clearly. She reached out one hand, the one without the IV line, and put her fingers against the baby's cheek. The baby turned toward the touch. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey, we've been waiting for you." Tae-gun watched his wife meet his son, and the delivery room with its monitors and its clinical efficiency and its walls that had witnessed 10,000 versions of this particular human moment held all three of them in it. And outside the hospital, the city continued its indifferent and constant noise, and none of it reached them. "June," Nia said quietly. "June." She looked at Tae-gun. "Marcus," she said. "For my father." He nodded. His throat was not cooperating with words. "June Marcus," she said. "That's who you are." The baby made a small sound, not the earlier outrage, something quieter, the beginning of adjustment to a world that was very loud and very bright and full of people who already loved him before he had any way to understand what love was. Tae-gun held him and looked at Nia, and the room between them was different from every other room they had ever occupied together. The office, the penthouse, the Midtown Club, the car moving through the city while the baby moved for the first time. This room was the one that came after all of those, the one where everything that had been in motion arrived somewhere. His phone, in his jacket pocket, buzzed once. Min-jae. Beck's men confirmed. Kim and Park in custody. Circle process initiated. It's clean. He read it and put the phone away. "Is it done?" Nia said. Her eyes were closed now, the exhaustion finally winning. "Yes," he said. She exhaled. "June Marcus." Made a small sound against his father's chest, and Tae-gun adjusted his hold and kept his knees on the floor beside his wife's bed and stayed exactly where he was. Outside, in the hallway, Min-jae stood at his post with the specific stillness of a man who had been through the worst of the day and come out the other side and was now doing what he always did, watching the door, covering the angle, making sure nothing else reached the people inside. The floor was quiet. The monitors beeped their steady confirmation of 2 heartbeats, and the night moved toward morning at the pace of all nights, indifferent to what had happened inside it, carrying its darkness forward toward the particular gray that comes before dawn, when the city pauses almost imperceptibly, when even Manhattan takes a breath, the breath before whatever comes next. Imjun Marcus spent his first 11 days in the NICU. Tae-gun was there every morning before 7. Not because anyone told him to be, nobody told Tae-gun where to be, but because the alternative was being somewhere else, and somewhere else was not a place that made sense anymore. He would arrive at the hospital's secured floor in the gray pre-dawn when the city was doing its closest approximation of quiet, and he would sit in the chair beside the incubator and watch his son breathe. That was the primary activity. Watching June breathe. It should not have been sufficient to occupy a man who ran a multinational logistics empire and a criminal organization stretching across the Pacific. It was entirely sufficient. Tae-gun sat in the NICU chair and watched the small chest rise and fall with the specific, focused attention he had previously reserved for situations where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and he thought about very little else. Nia was moved to a recovery room on the same floor 48 hours after the delivery. She was there when she was not in the NICU, and in the NICU when she was not in the recovery room, and the nursing staff, who had seen a great many things on this particular private floor and had developed the specific professional discretion of people who understood that certain patients required certain considerations, moved around both of them with efficient respect and asked no questions about the 2 security personnel stationed at each end of the hallway. On day 3, Nia sat in the NICU chair with June held against her chest, skin to skin, as Dr. Park had instructed, the small body learning warmth and heartbeat and the particular sound of his mother's breathing, and looked at Tae-gun across the incubator. "He's going to be okay," she said. "Yes," Tae-gun said. Dr. Park said his lungs are... I know what she said. I was there. She looked at him. I was watching June. The expression on his face was one she had no prior reference for, not from 4 years of professional proximity, not from the months of marriage, not from any of the rooms they had occupied together. It was entirely new, and it was the most undefended version of him she had ever seen. "You haven't slept," she said. "I slept. 2 hours doesn't count." "It counts." She almost smiled. "Even here, even in this room, with its incubators and its monitoring equipment, and the weight of 11 days sitting on both of them, the rhythm between them functioned, the push and the counter, the specific language they had developed across years of proximity and months of something more than proximity. "Go home," she said. "Sleep. Come back tonight." "Nia." "The security team is here, Min-jae is here, June is here, and I'm here, and everyone is okay." She held his gaze. "You being exhausted doesn't help any of us." He looked at her for a long moment, then at June. The baby was asleep against his mother's chest with the boneless, absolute trust of a newborn, the full-body surrender to warmth and safety that a person only achieves when they have no knowledge yet of the reasons not to. 3 hours, Tae-gun said. 4, she said. Minimum. He left. He came back in 4 hours and 17 minutes, which she counted, and which she did not mention. What? The formal circle proceeding against Kim Sung-woo and Park Jae-hoon convened on day 7. Tae-gun attended via secure video from a room in the hospital that the floor administrator had converted for the purpose. Min-jae was present in person at the circle location, a private building in Koreatown that served as the organization's internal deliberation space, the kind of room where decisions were made and recorded and carried the weight of institutional permanence. Nia knew about the proceeding, she had asked, and Tae-gun had told her, which was the arrangement they had. "What happens to them?" she said. Not the night before, the morning of, when Tae-gun was preparing the secure connection, and she was sitting in the NICU chair with June and watching him with the particular focused attention she had picked up from his father. The circle strips their operational authority. Their territories are redistributed. They keep their personal assets and their lives. A pause. It's the formal process. Not the other kind. Not the other kind. She was quiet for a moment. And Bayek, she said. Already done. He's in Busan. He'll stay there. Tae-gun looked at her. It's over, Nia. That part is over. She looked at June. It doesn't feel over, she said. Not a complaint. An honest assessment, the way she assessed things. I know, he said. It will. She held June's hand, the miniature fingers closing around one of hers with the reflexive grip of a baby who had no idea he was doing it, and believed him, mostly, in the way you believe things that are true but haven't yet arrived at their full weight. The proceeding took 4 hours. Tae-gun emerged from the room with the specific compressed stillness of a man who had closed a chapter and was now holding the book and deciding what to do with it. He came directly to the NICU. He sat in the chair and looked at his son and said nothing for several minutes. Nia waited. It's done, he said finally. Yes, she said. Kim and Park cooperated fully. The intelligence on Draw's operation is complete. His contracting network has been reported to federal authorities through a channel that doesn't trace back to us. His operation won't survive the next 6 months. She absorbed that. The tidiness of it, the way the threat had been dismantled through channels that left no fingerprints, that would look, to anyone examining it, like an independent federal investigation rather than the organized response of a man whose pregnant wife had been targeted in a hospital room. Min-jae, she said. He's fine. His wounds from... She stopped. In the chaos of the delivery and the days that followed, she had not fully processed that Min-jae had taken 2 hits in the initial moments of Wolf's entry into the medical suite. Both superficial, both treated immediately. She had been told this and had understood it and had not had the space to sit with it until now. I need to talk to him. He'll be here later. I want to thank him. Tae-gun looked at her. He left the door, he said. The words were even. She could hear what was underneath them. Not blame, something older and more complicated. The weight of a man who held himself responsible for the people under his authority and had spent 11 days carrying the fact that his security chief had been pulled away from a door that then opened. He came back through it in 7 seconds, she said. I know. Those 7 seconds were because I bought them, not because he failed. She held Tae-gun's gaze. Don't let him carry that wrong. He was quiet. It's already had that conversation with me, she said. I'm asking you to make sure it lands. I'll talk to him. Today. Today, he said. Boab. Minji came in the afternoon. He stood inside the NICU door with his hands at his sides and looked at Nia in the chair with June and then at Tae-gun standing near the window, and the expression on his face was the one she had been expecting. The specific weight of a man who had been running an account in his head for 11 days and had not yet found a balance he could accept. Sit down, Min-jae, she said. He sat. The chair across from her, the one Tae-gun usually occupied. Min-jae in a chair was slightly incongruous. He was a man built for standing, for positioning, for the alert readiness of someone whose job required constant physical preparedness. In a chair in a NICU, he looked very slightly uncertain, which was not an expression she associated with him. I owe you an apology, he said. No, she said. You don't. I left the... You received a credible threat on the building's ground floor and you responded to it. That's what your protocol required. She looked at him steadily. Wolf manufactured a gap in the security. The gap was manufactured. That's not the same as you creating one. I should have... Min-jae. Her voice was quiet but not soft. I threw a blood pressure monitor at a trained operative while I was 34 weeks pregnant. That bought me 6 seconds. You were back in 7. She paused. We both did what we could with what we had. That's the whole story. He looked at her. Then he looked at June, asleep against her chest with the same absolute trust he had been displaying for 11 days. Something moved across Min-jae's face. Not the professional mask. Underneath it, the thing that lived there when the professional mask was too heavy to maintain. He's small, he said. He's getting bigger, she said. Dr. Park says another week and a half, maybe 2, and we can take him home. Min-jae nodded slowly. He looks like the chairman, he said. I told Tae-gun that. He didn't know what to do with it. He never does, Min-jae said, which was the most unguarded thing she had ever heard him say. and it arrived with the faint trace of someone who had known Tae-gun long enough to say it without calculation. She almost smiled. "Thank you," she said, "for the 7 seconds, for the 4 years before that, for every time you ran protocol and kept his world from reaching me before I was ready for it." Min-jae looked at his hands. "It's my job," he said. "It was more than your job," she said. "You know that." He didn't argue. They sat in the NICU with the monitors and the small sounds of a room where new lives were being maintained with careful mechanical precision. And outside the hospital, the city was doing what the city always did, proceeding without pause, without acknowledgement, without interest in the specific gravity of what was happening inside this room. When Min-jae left, he stopped in the doorway and looked back. "He's going to be difficult," he said. About June, the faint certainty of a man making an assessment. "Obviously," Nia said, "his father was impossible at that age." "You knew Tae-gun as a baby?" 17, Min-jae said. "Same thing." He left. She sat with June and the monitors and the quiet, and for the first time in 34 weeks plus 11 days, she felt something that was not fear or calculation or the managed competence of a woman running a plan. She felt something that was simply rest. They brought June home on a Tuesday in December. Not the Mujin penthouse, she had raised that, carefully, 2 weeks before the delivery, and Tae-gun had listened and they had found a brownstone on the Upper West Side. Still secured, still within the architecture of Tae-gun's world, but scaled differently. A building rather than a tower. Stairs you could hear footsteps on. A kitchen that faced east and got morning light. She had chosen the kitchen herself. The morning they brought June home, Nia carried him through the front door while Tae-gun held it open, which she thought was probably a reversal of the usual arrangement, but felt correct anyway. The brownstone smelled like fresh paint and the specific newness of a space that hadn't been lived in yet. She stood in the hallway with her son and looked at the space. "It's good," she said. "Yes," he said. She walked through the room slowly, not touring, inhabiting the process of a body, learning a space by moving through it. June slept against her shoulder with the profound disregard for his surroundings that would eventually become one of his defining characteristics. She would understand this much later, looking back. At the time, she simply noticed that he slept through everything, which Dr. Park said was a good sign and which Tae-gun said was concerning. In the kitchen, she stood at the east-facing window and looked out at the brownstone small back garden, dormant in December, bare-branched, unremarkable, and felt the morning light on her face and held her son and did not think about anything in particular. Tae-gun came and stood beside her. They stood in the morning light and did not talk for a while. "I want to talk about the executive role," she said eventually. "Now?" "We're home. June is okay. The crisis is over." She shifted June slightly against her shoulder. "It's a good time to talk about it." He almost smiled. The real one, the version that had been appearing more frequently in the past 11 days, that was still new enough that she noticed each time. "Director of Operations for the Legitimate Holdings," he said. "Real authority over the North American portfolio. Your name on the organizational structure, not a courtesy title." She looked at him. "I want to build something," she said. "Not just manage what exists. I want to move more of the revenue into legitimate structures, long-term, systematically." A pause. "For June, I want him to have something to inherit that doesn't require—" She stopped, looked at her son's sleeping face. "Something different from what you inherited." Tae-gun was quiet. "That's a long project," he said. "I know, years, maybe a decade." She looked up at him. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her for a long moment in the morning light. "Yes," he said. "To which part?" "All of it," he said. "Director of Operations, the long project, all of it." She looked back at the garden. "I'm also going to need an office that isn't next to yours," she said. "Not because I don't want to be near you, because I need my own space to work, and your people treat any room adjacent to yours as an extension of your authority, and I need a room where the authority is clearly mine." "Same floor," he said. "Different wing. Acceptable." The morning light moved slightly as a cloud passed. June made a small sound against her shoulder, not waking, the noise of a baby processing dreams he had no category for yet, and resettled. She put her hand against the back of his head and felt his weight and his warmth and the specific miracle of a life that had arrived difficult and early and complete. The first week at home was the hardest of her life in ways she had not anticipated. She had handled interrogations in hospital rooms and security negotiations, and a man twice her size trying to take her out of a medical suite. She had managed a Mujin global subsidiary network across 3 continents from a secretary's desk. She had stood in front of 40 men in a midtown dining room and told them what she was. She was not prepared for the 3 a.m. feedings. June ate every 2.5 hours with the uncompromising consistency of a small person for whom time had not yet acquired social negotiability. He did not care that his mother had been awake since midnight. He did not care about anything except the specific and immediate fact of hunger, which he communicated with a directness that Nia found, in the small hours of the 3rd consecutive night, both impressive and punishing. Tae-gun took the 3 a.m. shift on night 4. She woke at 3:15 to silence. Not the alarming silence of something wrong, the different silence of something handled, and lay in the dark and listened and heard, from the nursery, Tae-gun's voice. Low. Speaking Korean, which he did in private with a different cadence than his English, less managed, more direct, the language that lived closer to whatever was underneath the professional architecture. She couldn't hear the words. She lay in the dark and listened to the rhythm of them. A man talking to a baby who couldn't understand him yet, explaining something or simply talking, because the baby needed sound and warmth and the specific reassurance of a voice, and here was his father's voice, available, consistent, present. She did not go back to sleep immediately. She lay and listened until the voice stopped and the brownstone settled back into its quiet, and then she closed her eyes and felt something she would spend a long time afterward trying to name precisely. The closest she got was this. She felt like she was somewhere she had chosen, not somewhere she had been placed or redirected or managed into. Somewhere she had looked at clearly and walked into with full knowledge of the cost and the difficulty and the specific weight of the life she was signing on to. That was different from anything she had known before. Dana came in January. She arrived from Baltimore with 2 large bags and the energy of a woman who had been waiting for the appropriate moment and had decided this was it. She installed herself in the brownstone's guest room with minimal ceremony and immediately made herself useful in ways that were specific and practical and did not require anyone's permission. She rearranged the nursing station in the nursery based on what she had learned from a YouTube channel about optimal positioning. She cooked in quantities that assumed Nia had not been eating adequately. And she held June with the practiced ease of a woman who had opinions about how babies should be held and was not shy about sharing them. She also, on her second evening, sat across from Tae-gun at the kitchen table while Nia was feeding June and conducted what appeared from the outside to be a normal conversation about the brownstone's neighborhood, and was, Nia understood when she heard the edge of it, something considerably more intentional. She caught fragments. Dana's voice. And I need you to understand that what happened in that hospital, Tae-gun's voice lower. I understand. It won't. Dana again. I'm not interested in won't. I want to talk about the systems that allowed it in the first place. Nia sat in the nursery and fed her son and let it happen. When Dana came to the doorway of the nursery an hour later, her expression had the specific quality of a woman who had said the things she needed to say and received an answer she was cautiously prepared to accept. He listened, Dana said. He does, when it's important, Nia said. He also offered me a job. Nia looked up. Managing the domestic security review for the family's private residences, Dana said, with the tone of someone reporting a fact rather than expressing an opinion. He said he needs someone who isn't already inside his organizational structure to identify the gaps. He's not wrong, Nia said. I told him I'd think about it. What are you actually going to do? Dana looked at her niece and her great-nephew, and then at the ceiling with the expression of a woman wrestling with a decision she had largely already made. Probably take it, she said. Baltimore's not going anywhere. She looked back at Nia. You need someone in this world who has your actual interest as the primary concern and not a secondary one. That's not a critique of Tae-gun, Nia said. No, Dana agreed. It's a recognition of structural reality. She came into the nursery and sat in the chair beside the window. He loves you. That's visible. That's real. But love inside a structure like his has a gravity of its own,
And I want someone in that structure whose job is specifically to notice when that gravity starts pulling in a direction you didn't agree to. Nia looked at her.
You've been thinking about this since November, she said. Since October, Dana said. Since you called me from a clinic on the Lower East Side and told me you were pregnant and scared and already planning where to run. Nia was quiet. You didn't run, Dana said. I want to make sure you keep not having to. June finished eating and made a small sound of completion, and Nia lifted him to her shoulder and felt his warmth against her neck and looked at Dana across the small room. Okay, she said. Okay, I accept the structural analysis, or okay, Dana, take the job. Both, Nia said. What? Spring arrived the way New York springs always did. Not gently, but insistently, pushing through the tail end of a February that refused to release its cold until mid-March, and then capitulating all at once, suddenly, the city shifting from gray to the aggressive green of trees that had been waiting and had run out of patience. June was 4 months old. He was no longer small in the NICU sense. He had caught up to his corrected age with the focused determination of a baby who had decided that the early arrival was not going to define him, which Nia found privately amusing given the parents involved. He had Tae-gun's dark eyes and her full cheeks, and a temperament that combined his father's intensity with her stubbornness in ways that Dr. Park described as developmentally normal, and that Nia suspected would become significantly more interesting as the years progressed. He also had, as Min-jae had predicted from the NICU doorway, an opinion about everything. Nia was back at Mujin Global 3 days a week, with a nursing room adjacent to her new office, the one in the west wing of the executive floor, separate from Tae-gun's but on the same level, and a schedule that she had constructed herself without consultation, which Tae-gun had reviewed and approved without requesting any changes, which she had noted and appreciated. Director of Operations, North American Legitimate Holdings, was her formal title. The first thing she did in the role was complete the subsidiary audit that Kim Sung-woo had buried 14 months ago. She filed it herself, directly, with the Circle's Financial Oversight Committee and with Mujin Global's external auditors simultaneously, which removed the possibility of it being buried a second time. The audit identified 3 additional shell structures connected to the same Red Hook network. 2 were dormant. 1 was still active, a logistics routing entity that had been processing payments for Drozd's contracting operation, which meant the intelligence she passed to Min-jae, who routed it appropriately, contributed directly to the federal investigation that dismantled Drozd's network entirely by April. She did not tell anyone she had done this. Tae-gun found out through Min-jae in March and came to her office on a Wednesday afternoon and stood in the doorway with an expression that she had learned over the course of the past year to read as, "You continue to do things that rearrange my understanding of what is possible." "The Drozd investigation," he said. She looked up from the quarterly projection she was reviewing. "The audit was already filed. The routing entity was in the same network. It would have been irresponsible not to complete the chain." "You didn't tell me." "I didn't need to. It was within my operational authority." She held his gaze. "Is that a problem?" He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Good." She looked back at the projection. "Close the door. I need to focus." He closed the door. She listened to his footsteps move away from the door and back toward the east wing, and she sat with the quarterly projection and the morning light coming through her west-facing window and felt the specific satisfaction of work done in a room that was unambiguously hers. The Circle's formal restructuring took most of the spring. With Beck's territory redistributed and Kim and Park stripped of their operational roles, the organization's senior structure required rebalancing. Alliances to be recalibrated, territories to be administered, the kind of institutional adjustment that Tae-gun navigated with the same careful efficiency he brought to everything. Nia participated in the parts that intersected with the legitimate operations. She did not participate in the parts that didn't, and this was not because she was excluded. It was because she had drawn the line herself clearly and held to it. "I'll build you something worth inheriting," she told Tae-gun on a night in April when June was asleep and they were in the brownstone's kitchen with the remains of a late dinner between them. "The legitimate side. That's my work. What you do with the rest of it, that's yours." She looked at him. "But I want the legitimate side to be large enough eventually that the rest of it becomes optional." He was quiet. "That's a long ambition," he said. I told you. A decade. Maybe more. You're asking me to, in effect, dismantle a significant part of what the name represents. I'm asking you to build something that doesn't require the other part to function. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to do it now. I'm telling you what I'm working toward, and I want you to know it clearly so there are no surprises later. He looked at her across the table. Does June know? He said. She almost laughed. He's 4 months old. When he's older, he'll know what his mother spent her career building and why. She paused. And he'll know what his father was and what his father chose to do with what he had. She picked up her glass. Those are both part of who he is. He deserves to know both parts clearly. Tae-gun was quiet for a long moment. My father never gave me a choice, he said. I know. The organization was the inheritance, the only one available. He looked at his hands, the tattooed hands he kept covered in boardrooms. In the kitchen of their brownstone at 11 at night, he didn't cover them. I didn't choose this because I wanted it. I chose it because there was nothing else. I know, she said again. June will have something else. Yes. She set down her glass. That's the project. He looked at her. Then we work on it, he said. Yes, she said. We do. In June, Min-jae took Dana to a restaurant in Koreatown that he said had the best soon tofu in Manhattan. Nia found out from Dana, who mentioned it with the specific deliberate casualness of a woman road testing how the information would land. Was it a date? Nia said. It was dinner, Dana said, with Min-jae. He recommended the restaurant. It seemed rude to decline. Nia looked at her cousin across the kitchen table where June was in his bouncer conducting a focused examination of his own hands. Dana, she said. Don't, Dana said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were absolutely going to say something. I was going to say that Min-jae is a good person. Dana looked at her. He's also deeply embedded in an organizational structure that I was hired specifically to provide independent oversight of, Dana said, with the careful precision of a woman who had been thinking about this exact point, which creates a conflict of interest that would require significant thought. Is that what you've been doing? Nia said. Significant thought. Nia. Donna. They looked at each other. June made a sound of discovery about his hands. The soon tofu was excellent, Dana said finally. Good, Nia said. There was a moment, in September, when June was 8 months old. It was an ordinary evening. Tae-gun was on a call in the study, the quiet, clipped cadence of Korean that she had learned over the course of a year to read for register. And this one was business level, manageable, not the tone that meant she should be paying closer attention. Nia was at the east-facing kitchen window. The garden had come through the summer green and full, and September had brought the first suggestion of change, the edges of things beginning to turn, the particular quality of late afternoon light that existed only in this narrow window between summer and fall, golden and slightly melancholy, and completely itself. June was on her hip, which was where he had decided to spend most of the past 3 months, having discovered that the vantage point was superior and that his mother was a reliable vehicle for navigating the world. He was looking at the garden with the focused curiosity of a baby who had recently discovered that things outside of himself existed and found this information endlessly interesting. Nia looked at him, looking at the garden. She thought about the Lower East Side clinic, the plastic chair, the water stain on the ceiling, the exact quality of the fear she had carried out of that clinic onto the sidewalk and into a cab and across the city and into a plan that had not survived contact with the truth of what she actually wanted. She thought about the morning she had walked back into Mujin Global and found a cup of ginger tea on her desk. She thought about a burgundy dress in a midtown dining room and 40 men watching her and the specific feeling of choosing to answer rather than deflect. She thought about a hospital room, a monitor thrown at a man's face, 7 seconds. She thought about a delivery room floor and her husband on his knees with a baby in his arms, and the first sound June had ever made, which had been outraged and immediate and entirely certain of its right to exist. June turned from the garden and looked at her. The dark eyes, Tae-gun's eyes, settled into her son's face with the particular genetic certainty of a trait that had decided where it was going, looked at her with the direct, unmediated attention of a baby who had not yet learned to filter what he felt from his face. He was simply looking at her, completely, without evaluation or agenda. She had spent years looking for rooms where she could be all of what she was without reduction. She had not expected to find the most complete version of it in a kitchen on the Upper West Side at the end of a Tuesday in September, holding her son in the afternoon light. "Hi," she said to him. He made a sound. She put her face close to his and felt his breath against her cheek, the specific warmth of it, the small animal aliveness, and held him tighter for a moment. From the study, the call ended. She heard Tae-gun's chair, then his footsteps. She knew the sound of them in this building the way she had learned the sound of everything that mattered, by paying attention over time. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her at the window with June and did not say anything, and she did not say anything, and the light came through the east-facing window and fell across all three of them. "Good call," she said. "Productive," he said. He crossed to where she was standing and stood beside her and looked at their son, who was now looking at his father with the same complete, unfiltered attention he had given his mother. "He's looking at me like he's assessing whether I'm credible." "He probably is," she said. "He gets that from me." Tae-gun looked at her sideways. "He gets the scowl from me," he said. "He does not scowl." "He scowled at Min-jae last week. Min-jae startled him." Min-jae was across the room. Nia looked at June. June, as if aware of the conversation, arranged his face into an expression of profound dignity. She laughed. The real one, full, warm, the laugh that had taken a long time to find its way into her, and that lived there now like it had always been there, like it was simply what happened when she was somewhere she had chosen to be. Tae-gun looked at her when she laughed. She had noticed he did that, turned toward the laugh, the way you turn toward light when it appeared in a room that had been dim. He reached out and took June from her arm, and June transferred with the unhurried certainty of a baby who had determined that both of these people were reliable carriers and was content to move between them as the situation required. "I had a call from the Pacific Reorganization Team," Tae-gun said. "The Incheon subsidiary structure is finalized. They want to discuss North American integration." "Schedule it for Thursday," she said. "I'll need the preliminary numbers by Wednesday morning. I'll have Seo send them. Tell Seo to include the Q3 freight reconciliation. I have a question about the port billing cycle that's been unresolved for 6 weeks." "You've been sitting on that question for 6 weeks." "I've been sitting on an 8-month-old for 6 weeks. The billing cycle question was third in the queue." She moved toward the counter to start clearing the remains of the afternoon. "It's moving up." He stood by the window with June and watched her move through the kitchen with the specific attention of a man who had been watching her move through spaces for years and had never fully resolved the experience of it into something ordinary. She had noticed that. She chose not to mention it. Some things were better without being named. "The long project," he said. She looked up. "I've been thinking about the timeline," he said. "The legitimate restructuring. A decade, you said." "Approximately." "I want to understand the milestones." "I'll build you a projection model." She held his gaze. "Clear metrics, realistic timelines, no glossing over what it costs in the short term to achieve in the long term. Send it when it's ready." "It'll be ready by the end of the month." He nodded. June made a sound of opinion about something, and Tae-gun looked at him, and the expression that crossed his face was still the one she didn't have a full category for. The undefended one. The one that arrived when he looked at his son and had not yet learned to manage itself. She hoped it stayed unmanageable. She didn't say that either. The kitchen light shifted as the afternoon moved toward evening, and the garden outside the east window began to lose its color to the slow advance of dusk. And June Marcus looked at the fading light with the focused curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to take for granted the fact that the world was full of things worth looking at. His mother stood in the kitchen she had chosen for its morning light and watched him look at the world. His father stood beside her with their son in his arms, in a building 3 miles from the tower where he had spent 30 years building an empire on the principle that power was the only thing worth having. He had been wrong about that. Not entirely. Power was still what it was, and the world he moved in was still what it was, and there were still men in expensive suits who would spend the rest of their lives calculating angles that pointed in his direction. That had not changed. It would not change entirely. But the thing he had built his life toward, the accumulation of control and territory and the kind of authority that made other men's posture change when he entered a room, that had turned out to be infrastructure. Necessary, real, occasionally brutal infrastructure that kept certain threats at a distance and certain doors open. It was not the point. The point was in the kitchen. The point was eating at a table that faced a garden. The point was an 8-month-old learning what faces were. The point was a woman who had spent 4 years making herself smaller in his spaces and had spent the past year refusing to do so, who had thrown a blood pressure monitor at a man twice her size and filed audit reports and chosen to stay, not because she had no options, but because staying was the thing she chose. He had not deserved her, initially. He was working on deserving her. It was longer work than anything the circle had ever asked of him. He looked at her across the kitchen, and she looked back at him with the direct, unfiltered look she gave to things she had examined clearly and made her peace with. And between them, June Marcus made the sound he made when he was about to fall asleep. A small, specific, winding down sound that was his version of telling the world he was done with it for now. "He's going down," she said quietly. "I know," Tae-gun said. He carried his son toward the nursery in the fading light, walking through the rooms of a building that held, for the first time in his adult life, something he had not known he was working toward. Nia stood at the kitchen window a moment longer. Outside, the garden held its last light. The city moved around the brownstone the way it always had. Dense, indifferent, enormous, entirely unconcerned with the specific weight of the lives inside any particular building. That was not a flaw in the city. That was what made it possible to live inside it with something private and real and entirely your own. She turned from the window. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked through the dark toward the nursery, toward the sound of her husband's voice reading to a baby who was already asleep, toward the particular stillness of a life she had chosen with full knowledge of what it cost and what it carried and what it meant. The woman who had once planned to disappear quietly from New York did not disappear. She stayed. And staying, it turned out, was the bravest thing she had ever done.